We're going to continue our discussion of Judaism. There's just way too much to most of these religions to even summarize them in a brief period, but so of course we couldn't quite finish up Judaism last time. There's just too many interesting things left to go into. Speaking of Judaism as we know it, I want to kind of double back and go into some more esoteric things and pull up the roots of the plants, but to finish getting the idea of Judaism as currently practiced straight in our heads, I want to follow up the discussion of rabbinic theology, which I borrowed, of course, from Solomon Schechter's great work, some aspects of rabbinic theology, I think 1912, and with brief consideration of the kosher laws and the holidays. I usually don't get too much into practices, but they are mighty important in Judaism, which has a great deal of a ritual element with a lot of beauty attached to it. Well, what about the kosher laws? This is a major issue in the New Testament, and it's always been a major issue. It became one again in the 19th century with a struggle of Reform Judaism to try to modernize and update the Jewish faith, and something the Orthodox thought was just prostituting and evacuating the Jewish faith. So always been very controversial. What is going on in it? Well, these laws, these dietary laws, or kashrut, it go way back there into the Pentateuch, and even if the Pentateuch and its laws are a lot more recent than we used to think, from our standpoint, it's still real long ago. And kosher laws have to do, of course, with food, and it's difficult to imagine how anybody ever thought it could be immoral to eat one thing as opposed to another. And indeed, that's not too surprising, since nobody ever did. That isn't the point of it. Ritual laws and their transgression is not the same thing as moral law and its transgression. And, of course, civil law and its transgression are not really moral either. I admit in certain cases one can spill over into the other, like a traffic ticket. It's not really, you've done nothing wrong morally, except you might think, well, you know, if I was going real fast, I might have endangered somebody, and carelessness is involved. But certain of these things, you know, you didn't put enough of your life savings into the stinking parking meter and they get you for it. Is that really morally wrong? Oh, you just forgot about it. Well, no, just policy, just the rules. And so on and so forth. So ritual law is, when it is disobeyed, it is a sin in a more specific sense, as I tried to communicate last time. And but the issue today is, what determined what was off limits to eat and what was on the menu? And here we need to go back even before the writing down of these laws, and we have to deduce them based on comparative ethnology or anthropology. One long-standing mistake is that these were health laws, that somehow, either because God revealed it miraculously or people were just very observant, analytical, inductive in their reasoning, that they knew about hygiene in detail that we don't. Now, that's not absurd. The ancients certainly were very shrewd and very observant. Sometimes the limits of scientific observational technology meant that they didn't know certain things we do, as in astronomy. But it didn't mean they were stupid. And so it wouldn't be that odd if somebody, for instance, noticed that getting trichinosis, or whatever they would have identified as the symptoms, was coupled with eating pork. But then again, you know, would you have noticed exactly why? I mean, not everybody that eats pork, especially if you cook it enough, would get trichinosis. And as it says in one of Woody Allen's Hasidic tales, some of the sages think the Torah originally meant simply to prohibit eating pork in certain restaurants. I mean, why didn't they put it that way? I mean, if it was just a concrete hygienic danger. And there are plenty of things you could eat that wouldn't make you sick that are nonetheless banned in kosher law. So what was the deal? Well, others have said they were boycotting animals that you had to eat as sacrifices in certain Canaanite religions. That doesn't cover enough of the territory anyway, and I'm not sure you can attribute to ancient Jews the kind of almost paranoid nonconformism that the Mennonites and Amish had when they eschewed buttons because the Prussian military officers had worn them, and mustaches because Kaiser Wilhelm and the others had them. I'm not so sure that was the case, especially since Judaism, at least the ancient religion of Israel, was so similar to Canaanite faiths in other ways. I think Mary Douglas, not a modern prophetess, but probably more illuminating than one, great anthropologist, in her essay, The Abominations of Leviticus, to be found in her great book, Purity and Danger, she illuminates the reason for all of this, and I do mean all of it, and I think she's right. I mean, what a comprehensive paradigm. If you know something better, let me know, but I'll be surprised. She said that really the kosher laws are based on taxonomy, that is, the way the culture organizes creatures and other things. She showed that a lot of otherwise very strange-seeming laws about not combining types of fabric, not allowing different types of animals to graze together, and sexual laws having to do with homosexuality and incest and so on, all can be understood as a matter of safeguarding the categories of the creation. And this is stated almost explicitly in the laws, in that they are called, these infractions of such laws are called tebhel, confusion, which gets translated abomination, confusion, bingo, there's the ticket. God has established certain orders of creation, and the things that don't fit in are not to be eaten or otherwise done, if you're not talking about kosher. Things that represent mixing or eating animals that bridge or transgress the categories, that's what you mustn't do. You're not safeguarding the categories of creation if you eat pigs or lobsters. Now, why on earth is that? Well, because in the Holiness Code of Leviticus it stipulates what constitutes, for instance, fish. Well, it's a critter that lives in the water and has fins and scales. You can eat fish. But you can't eat lobsters, shellfish, etc. Why the heck not? Because even though they live in the water, they don't have fins and scales. Oops. Right, there's certain kinds of insects you could eat, not all. There's some confusion with somebody thinking that insects had 4 legs. What a mess that was. Aristotle had similar bloopers. But you couldn't eat a lobster. I mean, it's an arthropod, like the bugs that you could eat, but it lives in the sea. But it doesn't have fish and scales, so it's not a fish. It's kind of an interloper, so to hell with it. You can't eat it, and if you do, you're somehow confusing God's creation. Well, how about poor Porky Pig? Perhaps he would like to be on the menu with the same sort of bizarre death wish that leads Charlie the Tuna to bemoan his failure to be captured. Why can't you eat porky? Well, it's because you can eat so-called cattle, livestock, but he doesn't qualify because they stipulate that livestock that are edible have cloven hooves and chew the cud. Whoops. The pig has cloven hooves, all right, but doesn't chew the cud. That is, it doesn't send what it's eating back up to its mouth to chew it and beat up the cellulose. What is it? Cellulose, the plant matter, because the cell walls are very tough, and then you send it down to another stomach like cows do, famously. They got a series of stomachs, and in between digestion periods, they're chewing the stuff again to break the matter down. Well, pigs don't do that. They don't need to do it. So they got the cloven hooves, but they, chew the cud soap. You're out of here. They're not considered kosher. And in the same way, we'll get to the sexual thing in a second, but that raises a big question. How could God not have kept to his own taxonomical laws? I mean, they identify these with God as with everything in their society, everything in all ancient societies, and all went back to God or the gods. How could God have made these mistakes? What's he doing creating these things? Well, why are there platypuses and such, right? Well, they don't answer that question, but I think I know the implicit answer. Probably they suppressed the solution to the problem that Zoroastrianism developed, namely that the good God did not create these things. A lot of the stuff you couldn't eat, a lot of the creatures tended to belong to the category of creeping things or vermin. And that's just the batch that in Zoroastrianism they said Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, did not create. But that Ahriman, the arch-fiend, did. Even in the New Testament we hear about this. In Luke, Jesus says that he's given his apostles the power over the enemy so that they can stomp on snakes and scorpions. That's interesting. These malevolent, creeping things are the creatures of the enemy, implicitly not of God. And my guess is that was the notion originally, but it has not surprisingly slipped away in light of the movement toward monotheism. You can't have a different creator, and so a hole is left in the system. Well, with the notion of not wearing mixed fiber cloth, it's the same thing. God created them over here and over there, and what business have you to join them together into some new thing? Oh, the idea of nylon and rayon, that would have driven them crazy. That would be much worse still. Now, some of them, I admit, have other ritual origins, though I don't think it's many. But where do you get the prohibition of eating milk and meat at the same time? Well, that is a kind of a category mixture, but more specifically on that one, it comes from one of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 34, that you shall not seethe or boil a goat in goat's milk. Well, eventually that was generalized, I think, wrongly, into the notion that you mustn't have milk and meat in the same dish, in the same meal. Not quite the original point, but someone is trying to create someone is trying to discern what the point of the original very specific commandment was, to come up with a general rubric of which it would function as one particular type, as indeed it does, but I have a hunch they missed the meaning. But since no one has ever come up with a good alternative, who knows? But nonetheless, you can't have a mixture. Now, how does that have to do with sex? Well, all sexual dalliance, all intercourse, etc., has to do with boundary crossing or not. I mean, that's the issue in all of it. To have reproduction, you must cross a boundary. Here's one where you have to do it. And not surprisingly, there is a way to navigate that passage. There is a bar one jumps, a line one crosses, and that is marriage. You go from the eligible, unmarried class of society into that of the married folks. And you must have a ceremony to make it all right for you to go over the line, and it is one of the many rites of passage, a ceremony implicitly of rebirth into a whole new life, reborn into the state of being a married person. Okay, so you are going from one category to another in a way that you must as you grow, and as we need people to reproduce. But this transgression of the line of social roles is mediated by a ritual, which another way of putting that, as Victor Turner would, another great anthropologist, sex between a man and a woman as of marriage is liminal behavior. It is behavior on the line that one crosses. It is made legitimate by the crossing, or usually only in the moment of crossing. But here, it's more than that. I mean, for instance, there are cultures that ban homosexuality except as part of the puberty rite. When one becomes marriageable, the young men will have sex with their uncles. They don't have it before or after. It's just a liminal thing, kind of saying, yeah, you are now very briefly in this twilight zone between the categories of your life. Well, marriage puts you into a new one where now you're all in the same boat, the same category of spouses. What then is wrong with homosexuality? It is having sex within the same category. And sex requires a legitimated crossing between categories. Here one is trying to do what would be, or something that one can envision as liminal behavior without the liminality. And of course, what I think you could consistently juggle the thing slightly and say, well, there can also be the category of unmarried homosexual and married homosexual, and you could very easily just replicate the whole thing that way. Maybe that's what's beginning to happen in our society, but they didn't think of it that way, and it just seemed a failure to cross over the line so that one could mate with the opposite sex. The only way, need I say, that mating would work. Why was incest wrong? Again, one had to mate across the lines outside one's own group. And if you were having sex with a blood relative, that was within the group. You've got to navigate a passage out of the family. You can't have sex within the family. What about bestiality, which Leviticus does take the trouble to condemn? What's wrong with that? Well, now you are violating the boundary lines in a way that cannot be sanctified. Why not? Well, it would be easy for us to say, because the animal doesn't have any say in the matter. The ancients wouldn't have looked at it that way, but they would have, I think, just seen that it doesnn't lead to mating, and that's a sign that, there's no offspring, unless you got the Minotaur or something. So this cannot be the natural way, and you can't cross this boundary in a legitimated way. It's not to say people didn't. They probably did quite frequently. What they certainly did not do very often, and does not come up in the Bible, but does come up in some ethical systems, is necrophilia. And need I say how that is a violation of categories. So Mary Douglas showed just a whole lot of examples of how everything in Leviticus, in the category of abominations, has to do with ceremonial mixing and a failure to safeguard the categories of creation. I think she's got to be right. And now, why does this stuff not obtain in the New Testament and in Christianity, which claims to be based on the whole Bible? Well, for the same reason that led to the stultification of the Old Testament, the idea that, it was divinely inspired scripture, and there's still plenty to learn from it, but in Christ it has been superseded. Now, I think that notion that Christ superseded the Torah, stultified it, made it into a museum piece, is a subcategory or a function of something else going on in early Christianity, namely Christianity passing through different cultural categories or markets. They decided after a great deal of debate that the Gentiles to become Christians did not have to become Jews. And why should they have to adjust to a whole raft of alien cultural mores just to believe in Jesus and be baptized in His name, etc.? The Pauline view won out there, right? And that meant that all of those laws were no longer binding. The New Age, the main thing that had happened, the kingdom of God opened up salvation to the Gentiles and made them co-heirs with Jews. And oddly enough, as Gentiles, they didn't have to become Jewish proselytes to become Christians. And that meant, well, the law was over with. If you were a Jew, it was your cultural pattern, and that's fine to obey it, but you mustn't tell Gentiles they have to. That is why they began to speak, in my opinion, of the nullification, the abrogation of the kosher laws and all these other things. They are the works of the law that are argued against in the Pauline epistles. They're not required. There's no thought in the Pauline epistles of libertinism, that moral good deeds are not required. In fact, it explicitly says more than once that people will be judged, Christians will be judged on their moral works. The issue is whether the demands of the Torah that define Jewish ethnicity are incumbent upon Gentiles, and so that's how that shakes out in early Christianity. That kind of thing is so important in Judaism that there is now a form of Judaism called Reconstructionist Judaism, based on I believe on the works of Mordecai Kaplan, which argues that you can and should be a good observant Jew whether or not you believe there's a God or that there were ever miracles or a supernatural. That doesn't matter. It's just that the ethnic markers of Jewish peoplehood, Jewish culture, are the laws of the Torah. And if you want to see Judaism as a culture, a subculture, or whatever, continue, well, this is what you need to do, which is a very interesting point. And so early Christianity of the Pauline stripe was just the opposite. That's all right for Jews and non-Christian Jews and Christian Jews. That's fine. But why should you have to do that if you're not a Jew but you are a Christian? So the paths began to diverge there. All right. So the kosher laws all seem to have to do with safeguarding the categories of creation. And as Mary Douglas points out, that is the origin and the nature of all the dietary laws of all cultures. And she goes into a lot of fascinating examples. Cultures are different. They see reality different. They evaluate and organize things differently, so their menus are different too. They don't know of any individual who set them. It seems to them it's always been that way. It seems like it's nature itself to have things that way. And as I love to point out, we've got good old American culture, which seems so freewheeling. We have darn near inflexible dietary laws too. I love to point this out when I'm with friends or family at Red Lobster. What is the difference between having a nice, yummy lobster with butter sauce and having a plate of palmetto bugs or huge cockroaches? We pay big bucks to eat that lobster, but we recoil in absolute horror if somebody lifted the dome off of the plate and there were these bugs. Well, what's the difference? It's almost like, why isn't it like the difference between having a bunch of popcorn shrimp and having a lobster? They're both segmented exoskeletal arthropods. What is the difference? Except the big ones have big boxing gloves on, which didn't seem to do them too much good. I don't see what the difference is, though I feel the same disgust. I would not. Well, if the money were right, who knows? I feel the same way. And why? Do I think it would be morally wrong to eat the cockroach? Well, it's absurd. How could it be wrong or right? Doesn't fit that category. But it does fit another one, because in our culture we don't define bugs as food. Suppose I said, "Hey, where's Helix, my cat?" And my wife says, "Well, we're kind of stretching the food budget, so that's him you're eating in that bun. We're having hot cats tonight." Oh, my God. Why would that be so loathsome? Because we don't consider cute little house cats to be food. I know they're pets. They're like little cousins of the human race, same with dogs and so on. Why do we hear that with horror the recurrent rumor that McDonald's serves horse meat burgers? The horses aren't our pets generally, but we like horses and esteem them almost as like kind of Star Trek, an alien race we respect. And whereas we don't feel that way about cows, right? Why is that? Munch them up. Who knows? But somewhere along the line, we came up with these taxonomical categories that govern how we perceive the world and the critters in it, and every culture has them. So is it arbitrary? Well, yes and no. You might think, geez, this religion is neurotic. Well, maybe, but look in the mirror. You got the same neuroses. It's just obvious to you in their case, because it's a different bunch of restrictions than you have. But you got them too. Every culture has them. To some degree, that's what we mean by culture. Well, anyway, there's a lot of other great ritual stuff you could deal with. Circumcision, a borrowed common Middle Eastern practice that became was adopted in Judaism as the covenant, the sign of the covenant between God and Abraham and Israel and so on. I guess I will leave you to look that up, or assume you know it already, and hasten on to the question of holidays or holy days. What are they and why? Well, they commemorate certain things. It's obvious even in the Bible that some of these holy days were originally agricultural or shepherds' festivals, and therefore they were scarcely arbitrary. Like Passover, it's quite clear, absolutely explicit in Exodus. Before the Exodus has happened, there is a feast of firstlings where the shepherds sacrifice the firstborn of every female animal. The idea being that God will appreciate this and will bless your sacrifice with more where that came from. And so Moses is depicted as Pharaoh saying, we got the Feast of Firstlings to observe. We can only do it in the desert. And yeah, that's certainly right, because it was a shepherd's thing. And besides, we don't want to offend the Egyptians who have different kosher laws, right? Just as I was saying. What's holy to us is unclean to them, so we don't want to invite reprisals. So they're already doing it. Moses starts fibbing when he says that they plan to come back after only a few days, but it attests, yeah, of course, we had the Feast of Firstlings already. And then because the Passover, the Exodus happens during it, they reinterpret it and give it a new historical significance. Same thing with the matzah, the unleavened bread. Originally, that was part of the grain harvest. One offered to God bread, crackers, made from the pure, unadulterated product of the wheat harvest and so on, so that becomes another holiday historicized as part of Passover. We don't put leaven in the bread to commemorate the fact that our ancestors were on call. They knew they'd have to leave any minute and couldn't take the time to put leaven in the bread. Yeah, that's not originally the point of it. But they were the Torah already explicitly tells us they were already observing these holidays and then gave them a new historical commemorative significance. So it's no surprise they kept getting reinterpreted. Now that's not something we just deduce, right? It's pretty obvious, pretty explicit. Well, what are the major holidays you wind up with? Well, there's the New Year festival, Rosh Hashanah, and what's the deal with that one? Well, same thing with most cultures. The world begins again then. Then in October there is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, 24-hour period of fasting and introspection. All day Jews pray for God's mercy and forgiveness. This is a post-exilic festival. Some of these are, some are not. Another in August is the 9th of Av, A.V., or Ab, A.B. This is another day of fasting to commemorate the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, the Herodian temple, by the Romans. Then Passover in the spring marks the Exodus from Egypt. And then the Feast of Weeks, or of First Fruits, it occurs in May or June, and is a commemoration of the giving of the Ten Commandments. The Sukkot, or tabernacles, or booths, is an autumn festival of the harvest. The Feast of Weeks originally was the great New Year's festival, the renewal of the kingdom, the creation, and the mandate of heaven upon the ruler, in a way we've discussed before. Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights, commemorates the victory of Judah the Hammer, Judah Maccabee, Judas Maccabeus, take your pick, and his brothers over the Seleucid Empire, drove them out, had about 100 years of freedom. There was a temple defiled by the Seleucids that had to be rededicated by the Hasmonean brethren, and they had only enough oil to have the altar fire going for a day, but somehow it lasted through the whole 8 days by miracle, supposedly. And so this is Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication of the Temple, rededication, the Feast of Lights, and a lot of these appear in the Gospel of John, thematically related to the discourses of Jesus, I am the light of the world, and so forth. That is the big gift-giving holiday, though the gifts are a bit more modest than at Christmas. The kids get little gifts every night of the 8-day celebration. Then Purim, which is kind of like the Jewish Halloween, big costume parties and games and stuff. That celebrates the deliverance from persecution of Jews in the Persian Empire by the efforts of Esther, a Jewish wife of King Ahasuerus. It's certainly a legend told to explain the borrowing of an Assyrian holiday called Purim, which means the casting of lots. But again, they historicized it. They gave it another meaning. So, just a whole lot of interesting stuff going on in Judaism by way of behavior and practice, but my bias is the theology and the history of the theology, so I will, without further apology, get back into that. What are the Jewish holy books? What are the origins of these rituals and so forth? Well, of course, you know, they're the scriptures. We talked a bit about that. They are divided into the 3 sections: the law, the prophets, the writings, the third group being just miscellaneous. But the Torah, of course, is the 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The prophets are our so-called history books, most of them: Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, not counting any of the other ones like Ruth and all that, Jonah, nope. So they are these history books and all the books of the prophets that we, the ones we would call prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and so forth, with the exception of Daniel. And so they speak of the former prophets and the latter prophets. Why are both considered prophets? Actually, there's a very good reason. I mean, you could very easily add a 4th slice in the cake and have histories, but the reason the histories and the prophecies are together is that the history is all given as an illustration of the principles of especially Deuteronomy, but also the prophets whose platform appears there. The idea that God, in giving the Torah, has set before his people two paths. They could go the path of covenant fidelity and obedience, and God would reward them, but they could start to forget about him and just do whatever the hell they pleased and have hell to pay. So that is set up loud and clear in Deuteronomy. The prophets, especially, well, really all of them, but especially Isaiah, Jeremiah, they're busy saying, hey, which way do you want it? You're not obeying God. It doesn't take a great gift of clairvoyance to see what's got to happen. And the Babylonians are marauding across the world. Don't you think they're going to come here? And if you haven't been keeping up your end of the deal, you think God's going to protect you? I got news for you. You need him. He doesn't need you, etc. Some just great stuff there. And then these history books are written as object lessons, saying, you see what happened when we did, and more often when we didn't, when our ancestors didn't obey the Torah. And so, it's like the illustrations of the didactic preaching. So all of that together is the Nevi'im, the prophets, the Torah and the Nevi'im. The writings is everything else. It's liturgical texts. It's poetry, the Song of Solomon, the Book of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and edifying narratives like Jonah, which really doesn't belong in the prophets, nor is it a book of prophecy. Then there's Ruth. There's the book of Daniel, an apocalyptic work that really is not much like the other prophets. And there's the so-called history, the book of Chronicles, rewritten from Samuel and Kings by these militantly self-important priests of the rebuilt temple after the exile, accentuating their role in everything and trying to trace back all the minutiae of the Second Temple to David as if he had hatched the whole thing and designed it and just handed the blueprints to Solomon. Of course, there was no Solomonic temple at all, but again, that was just a way of anchoring the post-exilic Herodian temple into the past time of foundations and credentials and sacred prototypes and so forth. And so you got all kinds of stuff. Why did something wind up in the writings if they ketubot? How come when they would fit formally with the prophets or wherever? Well, it's because of age. All the stuff, no matter what genre it belonged to, that appeared very late in the day while they were still debating what ought to be in the Bible, it tended not to go in, as did some other wisdom works like the Wisdom of Solomon, which is written in Greek, not Hebrew, so they didn't want to toss that in. There were others that were enjoyed very much by Pharisaic Jews, like the book of Tobit, which was considered canonical for quite some time in Palestinian Judaism. It finally got omitted, though. And then there was a continuing production of apocalypses and stuff that never even made it in. I mean, a lot of these. Let's add a kind of a quasi-fourth group, the Apocrypha, the secondary canon of diaspora Judaism, Hellenistic Judaism. Some of it originally written in Greek, most of it in Hebrew, but translated into Greek, and that, of course, is Tobit, Judith, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Sirach, Wisdom of Solomon, and so on and so on. And these are some quite long and a lot of great stuff in all of them. But they were just too darn late, and for the Palestinian Jews to accept. But most Jews, 2/3 or so of contemporary Jews who were Greek speakers and lived throughout the Mediterranean, they used the Greek Bible, which contained these. And early Christians, who were also Greek speakers, picked up this version of the Bible. The Greek Septuagint is their Bible, their Old Testament. And it wasn't until Martin Luther came along that a significant body of Christians rejected it, though he still liked it. But he said, it shouldn't be part of Scripture. It isn't part of Scripture. Most of it's not bad, but not really Scripture. So many Jews did have this, what Catholics now call the deuterocanonical books, the secondary but genuinely canonical books. And then you can, if you want, speak of another group of books that were held sacred by one or another Jewish sect, what we call the pseudepigrapha, which loads of apocalypses and other things, apocalypses of Zechariah, Elijah, Moses, Enoch, Baruch, you name it, they wrote it, or supposedly did, because it's all pseudonymous writing, which is what pseudepigrapha means. And these, again, were held sacred by, for instance, whoever compiled the Dead Sea Scrolls. They had copies of loads of these. Were they ever considered Scripture? Well, I imagine they were. At least they were used as Scripture. The question of a Scripture and the question of canon are two somewhat different, albeit related questions. In Buddhism, there's all kinds of Scriptures, but no one canon. Some Buddhist sects have never heard of a scripture of another Buddhist sect, or they don't consider it that important and zero in on the teaching found in this one. There's no one Buddhist canon, though there are loads of Buddhist scriptures. And apparently there was a period in Judaism where that was true, but eventually they did consolidate the canon, and they used the acronym. I don't know if that really is a good way to put this. They took the T, N, and K for the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, law, prophets, and writings, and made them into, they jammed them together as the consonants and then assigned vowels, so it became the Tanakh. The Hebrew Scripture. And when did this happen? Well, we don't know exactly. It probably had. It's more or less coterminous with the New Testament writing period. Of course, we don't know exactly when that was, but it was a product of debate, well, of common usage being somewhat filtered out and debated over a long period of time, probably culminating around the end of the first century of the Common Era. After Jerusalem was destroyed, Yohanan ben Zakkai, understood to be the Moses of his day, worked with the Roman conquerors, and they agreed to appoint him the head of an exclusively religious Jewish Sanhedrin in Palestine, not in Jerusalem, in Yavne, the coastal town, where they would meet to debate the Torah to their heart's content. But unlike the Sanhedrin depicted in the Gospels, which had actual political authority over homeland matters, these guys didn't after the revolution of Jerusalem against Rome. They said there's no reason you shouldn't have autonomy in religious matters, but we're taking over the rest of it, the policing, the taxing, and so on. And so they zeroed in on specifically religious stuff, and one of them's got to be what exactly is in the canon. And it appears there were some disputes. Some people thought that there were a few weird books that were not getting sufficient scrutiny. How about the book of Ezekiel, which had a plan for a temple that never got built? Herod's temple did instead. Some prophecy, huh? Some said, how about Esther? Esther doesn't mention the name of God a single time, though it's all about the providence of God, as any idiot can see reading the book. A great story. And so some thought, still, you don't have the name of God in it? And so shortly it did. The Greek Esther and the Apocrypha has what are called the additions to Esther. And there God is mentioned, and the story becomes a little longer. All right. What's another one that nearly didn't make it? The Song of Solomon, or Canticles. A bunch of love songs stemming originally from the worship of Baal and Ishtar, Tammuz and Ishtar. And you can see how that one didn't go in there, but they tried to bowdlerize it and cut most of the overt mythology out of it. You can still see it there, though. And even without the mythological names, people could see that it was about sex, and so we're told that it used to be sung by Jews as a bawdy drinking song. And, your breaths are like to doves, and so on and so on. Wait a minute, wait a second, guys. And so one rabbi issued a curse on anybody that sang as a bawdy song. Anyway, and that led to some people saying, you dopes, it's not just about that, it's about the love of God for Israel. And Christian interpreters were later going to say the same thing. It's about the love of Christ and the church. Yeah, well, sure, if that's what it takes to get it to stay in the canon, why not? But you can see why some people have their doubts about that. Then, what do we got? Esther, Canticles, Ezekiel, and I am forgetting one, but it didn't really matter. They all eventually got accepted in there, and Song of Solomon was even more highly thought of for having been rejected by some. Somebody reacted saying, one of the head of I forget now. It's one of the great rabbis. He said, no, you got it wrong. The Song of Solomon, being about the love of God and Israel, is even holier than the others. That's the same sort of thing that went on in the early church, where some people were saying, I don't like that gospel that starts out in the beginning was the word. It's filled with Gnosticism, and in fact I hear it's written by Cerinthus, the Gnostic. And so Irenaeus and Polycarp and the others said, oh, no you don't, no you don't. No, in fact that one's written by the favorite apostle of Jesus, so there, stuff it. And so there's an attack on a book that some like, and so they bent over backwards to double its acceptability. So again, it seems like there were some debates, but we wound up with the books, at least in the so-called Catholic Bible today, the Apocrypha. You can find almost any Protestant translation that has them too. Let's see. When they're called the Apocrypha, what did that mean? It's a Greek term. It means secreted away, literally. All that meant was copies of those books were left in the cupboard when Torah scrolls and the like were brought out for public reading. They decided not to suppress them, but just not to read them as scripture publicly. And you might even say that's what the difference was between scripture and non-scripture. Is it read liturgically to the congregation? Well, that wasn't the end of sacred writing in Judaism, not by a long shot, because there was all kinds of systematic commentary upon the scriptures. After all, is the text simply as Roland Barthes once said, a field of signifiers? What in fact does it mean? And so the sages, beginning with the scribes who are mentioned in the New Testament, the scribes start commenting and especially applying the law. And I've said in various contexts, my favorite example of that would be not taking the name of Yahweh, your God, in vain. Well, the idea was to build a fence around the Torah, a protective barrier, to erect secondary commandments that are not actually given in the written Torah, but which will stop you from getting within breaking distance of the Torah commandments. And you can understand some of the stuff in the Sermon on the Mount this way. You've heard it said, you shall not commit murder, but I'm telling you, don't even get angry with your brother. Why? Well, that's kind of a tall order, but if you manage not to be angry at somebody, what are the chances you're going to murder them? Not much. Told not to commit adultery. Well, I'm telling you, don't even contemplate doing it, because if you do, you're increasing the chances. So if you can govern your motives that well, you're never even going to get close enough to the actual commandment to break it. And In the same way, the name of Yahweh, it says, you shall not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain, and Yahweh will not hold guiltless him that taketh his name in vain. Okay, I get the picture, or do I? What exactly is it telling me not to do? If this is a commandment of God, I better know. I better get this clear. And so the rabbi said, well, what would it mean? And probably originally it meant you shall not lie under oath. Because you see people in the Old Testament all the time swearing, saying, as Yahweh lives, I didn't do so-and-so. Well, you see what you're doing there. You're saying there's nothing truer than this, that Yahweh is the living God, right? We can all agree on that. Well, I tell you, it's just as true that I didn't steal that guy's lawnmower. So if you were lying, you were in a heap of trouble. I mean, they might not be able to figure out that you were lying, but God would know, and so you better watch out, because one day he's going to wash your mouth out with water from the Dead Sea. Or also breach of contract. As Yahweh lives, I will finish this construction job by the 1st of May. But you don't. That's like when Jacob says to Laban, Yahweh watch between you and me. You know, he's going to watch out. You better not welch on this agreement we just made. Mithras did that in the Zoroastrian religion. You made a pact, he would know, and he would enforce it. So at least that's what the commandment meant, but people began, especially as time went on, to say, is that all? I mean, that's important, but I don't want to make any slip-ups here, especially if there's a big price tag on it. You suppose it could mean invoking the name of Yahweh in magic? You suppose it could mean saying it flippantly? Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. How are we going to play it safe? We'll tell you what. We know the high priest has to pronounce the name Yahweh in a stentorian way inside the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the temple, once a year on the Day of Atonement. So it is commanded that he say it then. Why don't we say that nobody else in Israel ever says it or writes it? Yeah, I know that the commandment probably didn't have that in mind. But let's play it safe. If we stick to that standard, there's no reason to worry about actually breaking the commandment wherever it stops. So they would do this. They would take the approach of just unpacking the commandment. Like, don't work on the Sabbath. Well, all right, I understand that in broad outline, but there's some things that take effort, but I'm not being paid. Like playing a game on the Sabbath, or building something as a hobby. Could I do that? And eventually they said, nah, better not. We've got to apply this law and determine what it means, because if we don't, then it can mean anything, and then it means nothing. So there was a lot of applications. They came up with things that seemed crazy to us, but perhaps they're not once one understands the rationale. Like, ladies, let's not throw dishwater out the kitchen window on the Sabbath, because for all you know, the water there might have caused seeds in the ground to spring up, and that's good. But if you go and tear them up, that's bad. You're killing. Or better, I'm mixing this up with a Matthean parable. Well, let me put it this way: if you throw the water out the window, dishwater out the window on the Sabbath, I'm going senile here. You can't do that. You can't just throw the damn dishwater out the window, because it might hit the seeds and cause them to grow. That's what I meant to say. And then what are you doing? You're farming, and you can't do that on the Sabbath. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't mean to. It doesn't matter. Doing it is doing it. Let's play it safe. We're talking about the Word of God here. So these are just some examples of how the scribes, later to be called the rabbis, amplified and interpreted and extrapolated from what the Torah does say to what it doesn't explicitly say. I mean, the more new matters come up, the more you're going to have to do this, right? When people say the Bible is against abortion, what do they mean by that? They can't find a place in the Bible where it even mentions abortion. Well, if they know what they're saying, some do, some don't, what they mean to say is that we think that the principle of not taking innocent life enunciated in the Bible would have to apply to this. Well, all right, it's an inference, not a straight reading. We think it's kind of important to keep those straight, but we're willing to fight for those inferences. I think that is a valid inference, but I have to admit that's all it is, if it matters. Okay, so they would apply it to new issues. Oh boy, I tell you, all these biomedical issues, these stem cell debates and so on, that's just classic stuff where there's no explicit guidance, so what are you going to say? Well, all of this jurisprudence, this oral commentary that came about through generations of scribal debate, usually, from what we hear about in the writings, it could be pretty vociferous, but collegial nonetheless. One guy says, here's the answer, and the other one recoils and says, oh no, how long are you going to profane the Shekinah with nonsense like that? But then it gives them both kind of a pat on the head and say, well, there you go, Rabbi A thought this, Rabbi B thought that. And it was friendly debate, okay? All of this stuff, this commentary is called, eventually is called the Mishnah, which means the repetition. And they decide that since there is so darn much of it, and it is becoming the law of the land, they had better collect and codify it. And who's the guy that spearheaded that attempt? Rabbi Akiva. He was a great mystic and scholar. Interestingly, he had been a kind of John the Baptist figure for a Messiah who led a revolt against Rome between 132 and 135 CE, a man named Simon ben Kosiba, who adopted the stage name of Simon bar Kochba, Kochba, and so he was a 2nd century character, probably born right at the turn of the centuries. Simon bar Kochba meant the son of the star, a reference to that Numbers passage where Balaam the prophet predicts that a star will appear to announce the birth of the royal son. The revolt was crushed after the 3 years. Bar Kochba was dead. We have a couple of short epistles of his that show he was very concerned for ritual stuff. And we are, that is, like, he wanted to make sure that he had the right kind of citrons to use for a festival and so on. Very, very picky, very devout, in other words. Well, Rabbi Akiva recognized Bar Kochba as the true Messiah, but then he was defeated and died. And what was the Jewish reaction to that? Well, officially, the rabbis thereafter said, let's just forget about this. What do you say? God will send his anointed one in his own time. Let's not rock the boat. But, of course, you don't ban something people are already not doing. And, in fact, we find that the Jewish curiosity and tendency to set dates for the end of the world continued unabated. You read Abba Hillel Silver's History of Messianic Speculation in Israel. It's so funny to see neck and neck the urgings of the rabbis, generation after generation, to say, look, we've been embarrassed enough by this, everybody cool it on Messianic speculation. And then often some of the same guys would say, however, if you want to know my opinion, it's going to be so-and-so date. Very funny, and so true to human nature. So it didn't really stop him, and there were other messiahs. But Simon bar Kochba he may actually have become a doctrine. Gezer Ramesh has the interesting idea that the notion of a northern Galilean Messiah, Messiah ben Joseph, which you read about, I think in the 3rd century BCE. Wait a minute, is that? No, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. No, that CE, right? You start hearing references to a Messiah ben Joseph from the north who is to come and die in battle against the enemies of Israel, a necessary setback to atone for the sins of Israel, but to make way for Messiah ben David and the southern Judean Messiah. Where did they get the idea of that? Well, Vermesh thought it might have been that some people who esteemed Simon Bar Kokhba as the real thing just could not accept it when he died and apparently failed. And so they mythologized him into Messiah ben Joseph and created a prophecy that took up upon his death and said, oh yeah, there'll be a Messiah who will die. That's not the end of the story. There'll be a second one who will prevail. It was a way of kind of continuing to revere him, but in a secondary capacity, the same way if you were a follower of John the Baptist and the sect was dying, you could at least join the like-minded and become a Christian, even though it meant you had to demote John to a mere forerunner of Jesus, but what the heck, it was better than nothing. So it may be that Simon Bar Kokhba became the preliminary dying Messiah of the North. We don't know, though. It's just an interesting speculation on his part. Very fascinating. I take it seriously. The one reason I'm going into this is that Messianism is a recurrent thing, and we ought to know about that, and there'll be more to say about it today. Another thing is to point out an interesting way in which heretics are dealt with, because the fellow Akiba backed the wrong horse, and this is quite an embarrassment, needless to say, right? He wasn't just written off as a heretic. I mean, we think maybe Simon Bar Kokhba himself was revered later as Messiah ben Joseph, but Rabbi Akiba certainly is always remembered as a great rabbi, even though he made this huge mistake. And what were they going to do? Negate all of his legal opinions and stuff? Nah, they couldn't do that. Pretty interesting. Well, and I tell you, another big reason is that Akiba was a great scribe, was the one who started the process of collecting and codifying the oral tradition of commentary on the Torah. And so he began it. It wasn't done when he died, but he did start the process, which is carried to completion right before the 3rd century of the Common Era began. That is, right before the year 200. Wait a minute, is that right? Yeah. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, or in English, Rabbi Judah the Prince. He actually presided over the codification of the oral Torah and had it written down as the Mishnah, or the repetition. That is not a mere repetition of the Torah, but how it had been elaborated in the process of being repeated and passed on over the years. As I say, he did this at the end of the 2nd century CE. And another thing he did conceptually was to introduce the idea that which is implied in the law of Moses simply is the law of Moses. It's not something other than it, and therefore it is not something negotiable or negligible. No, if these scribes have in fact unpacked the intent of Moses, then what they say the text means, the text includes, the Torah includes. So you here clearly pass from the oral to a written law. Of course, the Mishnah and the Gemara are both human writings, and but we can tell because of how they fit together, what the relationship is between Scripture per se and specific writings. Well, okay, so in this case, it was the one includes the other, the one is tantamount to the other, the interpretations of the one are part of the one. And so oral tradition is now oral Torah. The extrapolation and embellishment, it is the Torah, the dual Torah of Israel, written and oral. And what do you mean it is the Torah? Well, logically, if it's implied in it and all you're doing is unpacking it, yeah, that's a pretty safe and accurate statement. But they also meant, and here's a dubious claim, Moses actually got all of the stuff in the Mishnah from the mouth of God and passed it on orally, because he was afraid if people got their mitts on it in written form, they would mutilate the stuff. And that is, add all manner of things and corrupt the text. So it was important to have an oral tradition that was passed down from Moses to Aaron and Joshua and to the men of the great synagogue and so on. You read this, what was supposedly passed down in the beginning of the chapters of the fathers, the Pirkei Avot. And this is kind of strange, because we would say that is the grand opportunity to blow it out of all shape, beyond recognition, whatever the original Torah was. If you leave it to oral transmissions like a game of telephone, and sure enough it is, it has grown quite a bit, and their whole system implicitly recognizes that. So, the Mishnah was written down, and at the end of the 2nd century A.D., and he gets, let's see, yeah, so he gets the Mishnah done, but you know what's going to happen. The same kind of process of commentary and application on that has happened on the Bible. And so here we go again. We've got what is now called the Gemara, Gemara, which is commentary by the scribes on the text of the written Mishnah. And that is going to take quite a while, and so it's closed off in written form twice in 2 different major Jewish communities of the day. There was one group of scribes meeting in Palestine still, and they decided to codify and write up everything everybody was saying in their circles around 425 CE. But the other group set in Babylon, what about them? They're quite let's see. This went on for let's in Babylon, where we had long-standing Jewish settlement. They went on for another 75 years. So you had 2 Talmuds, as they're called. The Talmud means like a deposit of teaching, is all. Talmudim are students. That even goes into the name of the horrible group, the Taliban, the same Semitic root. They're the 2 Talmudim. The 2 Talmuds are, though they overlap to a great degree, even verbally, the Babylonian one is longer than the Jerusalem or Palestinian one, because it has the extra 75 years worth of material. And 425 CE was the closing and the writing down of the Talmud, see if I can get this word right, Yerushalmi, or the Jerusalem Talmud, but the other went on until 500 CE, the Bavli, or Babylonian Talmud. And the one is longer, of course, because it waited a long time to cut off the discussion, if they did, and to write down what they had. And so both survived the best attempts of bigoted Christians in the time of the Protestant Reformation to burn all copies of the Talmud. And however, that made it virtually impossible to do textual criticism upon it. Not nearly enough ancient copies left. What do you got? Commentary on the Torah becomes the Mishnah when it's written down. Commentary on the Mishnah, called the Gemara, gets written down, and the resulting whole is the Talmud, and there are two of them. So that has an awful lot to do with all this stuff we've been saying about what the Jewish faith was about and what they thought of God, and so on and so on. Okay, Rabbi Akiba, Rabbi Judah the Prince, a couple of great Jewish heroes of the faith. But that's not the end of it. The codifications of more but we're going to leave that there and say that there were various reactive movements, and movements of different kinds, including the great movement of mysticism called the Kabbalah. And this is something that's increasingly popular today. But it always has been in certain circles. Let me just mention a 12th century movement started by a man named Anan, or Ananias, short for Ananias, Anan ben David. He appeared to have discovered some of what we know of as the Dead Sea Scrolls, some more from that ancient temple library, and was inspired to start his own sect, the Karaites, K-A-R-A-I-T-E-S. And they were a pious, almost monastic group of Jews that were sort of like their precursors, the Essenes, or whoever they were, Dead Sea Scrolls sect. And they liked all the study of the Bible and the scrolls, and decided they were going to just dump all the rabbinic commentary. Oh boy, and rubbed some rabbis the wrong way. And so these guys were heretics, still around. They had a much more streamlined, stripped down, and severe version of Judaism without the scribalism, of some interest to Christian origins, because some have wondered if Christianity did not similarly grow out of the Dead Sea Scrolls sect, not being identical with it at first. There was another movement called Hasidism, or the movement of the pious, the Hasids. And this, however, had to do with the application of the Kabbalah, so let me get right on into that. This is something that you and I, with our proclivities toward the esoteric and the arcane, can scarcely pass on by, so I don't intend to. However, since it is secret stuff, ask yourself, are you worthy to hear this? Because who knows what might happen. If you're not worthy, if you're not prepared, I wouldn't envy you. Here's a great little story that they used to tell about people being prepared or not for the revelations of mysticism. A story called The Four Who Entered Paradise, meaning heaven, apparently. And they believe the Garden of Eden had once been on earth, now it was in heaven, so that's where you would go if you went to paradise in a visionary state. Well, some mystics believe that the book of Ezekiel contained the methodology for ecstasy, that if you meditated on the first couple of chapters of Ezekiel, where Zeke is leading a worship service down by the riverside, the river Chebar in Babylon during the exile, and sees the throne chariot of God carried by four-faced cherubim. Oh man, what a story. If you meditated on that, you too would see the throne chariot of God, because your spirit would be propelled into the heavenly courtroom, and you better be careful. Just think of Dorothy and her buddies before Oz the Great and Powerful. Watch what you say, watch what you do. Don't say anything stupid, because if you do, the angels and the archons will come and start beating you up. So just watch out, be on your best behavior. And so they figured that's the way to do it. We'll meditate on it, we'll have the same experience, and I guess it worked. But again, you could become unhinged. So 4 of them decide they're going to undertake this. And they won't even let you know about it until you're 40. And then you might decide whether you want to look into it, but it's not kid stuff. So, okay. Akiba and 3 others went into, I forget the names, and Ben Azai was one of them. Who cares, though? They go and get together to study and to meditate and hopefully have the same vision, and they do. And they're enraptured. And finally they come out of it, and they have seen the heavenly throne room in spirit, but of the 4, only Akiba comes out unscathed. He's moved, he's illuminated, but he's the same old wise Rabbi Akiba. What happened to the other 3? Not so lucky, I'm afraid. One of them died. Man shall not see me and live. All right. Another one went insane. You'll never believe what I saw. And then the other one became a heretic. Why? Well, he couldn't understand what he had seen. And apparently he saw 2 thrones in heaven. There was Yahweh, the God of creation, and then there was Metatron, the one who sits beside the throne, the patriarch Enoch, transfigured into a heavenly fiery form as an angel, as the lesser Yahweh, as it says in the Heckalot texts like 3rd Enoch, later apocalypses, and or something. He saw something and began teaching, there are 2 powers in heaven. Bitheism, binitarianism. Need I say, early Christianity taught a form of that. And as Margaret Barker reminds us in her great book, The Great Angel. I mean, how many times do you need me to recommend that book? I assume you're looking for a copy by now. In that book, she shows how that this whole myth pattern that subsisted for many centuries after the compilation of the Bible survives from polytheistic Israel when they had El Elyon, God Most High, the chief of the pantheon, and enthroned beside him was the young warrior Yahweh, one of his many sons, who, however, had the guts to face down Leviathan and Rahab and destroyed them and became co-regent. Yahweh, Yahweh, a mighty man of war, as Exodus says. That was the old Israelite religion. Give me that old-time religion. And it was good for the pre-Deuteronomic Israelites. It was good for the pre-Deuteronomic old Israelites, etc. I can't even say it once, much less twice as fast. Then it's good enough for me. At least it was good enough for the New Testament. It was good enough for Philo, for Gnosticism, etc. You got to read that book. And so something like that was going on. And from the standpoint of regnant Orthodox monotheistic Judaism, the guy had become a heretic. Even worse than going crazy. Men, don't let this happen to you. Right? You be real careful. This is a classic cautionary tale. They're not telling you not to do it. They're just saying you damn well better be ready for it. And now, did this actually happen to Akiba? Who the heck knows? Could have. I mean, it's nothing out of the question. People do have visions. Did they all have the same vision simultaneously? Well, yeah, they might have. I mean, it's pretty clear that a lot of the Sufi masters were undergoing the same. They were covering the same territory in their visions and dreams. Must be some sort of brain structure thing, using the active imagination of Jung. Maybe it did happen, but the point is, I mean, something was happening, and apparently it was pretty potent stuff, just like Madame Alexandra David Neild says of esoteric Tibetan Buddhism, that there's some of these visionary exercises that are so severe, some people come out of them in a straitjacket. I'm not dismissing that at all. But I guess the reason it's important is if Akiva did have anything to do with this, it enables us to get a foothold on history and to push this kind of mysticism, which is called throne mysticism or Merkava mysticism, back into the beginning of the Common Era of Judaism and Christianity. And any way you cut it, there are other signs, like even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that these guys figured they had seen what was happening in heaven, like in the book of Revelation, chapter 4. So, yeah, it may be that early, at least in some form, this Kabbalistic lore. Okay, let me attach a name or two to this. In the Kabbalah, the word just means tradition, but of course they have in mind a particular tradition. Just like Tantra just means tractate or treatise, but on a particular kind of subject. And the name gets appropriated after a while. Well, the first major couple of documents that go back to the 2nd or 3rd century CE, it would be the Sefer Yetzirah. I'm probably butchering that. I don't know Hebrew. I just like to fake it. The Book of Creation comes from about that time. And then there's a good bit later, you got to jump 900 years or so to the Bahir, the Book Bahir, B-A-H-I-R. And that goes into some of this stuff. But the major book of Kabbalah is the Zohar, Z-O-H-A-R, the Book of Splendor. This is like the Encyclopedia Britannica. This takes volume after volume after volume. I got a 5-volume set that just is selections from the thing. Who wrote this? Well, supposedly you have a 2nd century rabbi who wrote it, but in fact, no. Rabbi Yohai, I forget the rest of his name, I can't believe that, but it isn't. It's actually written by a Spanish rabbi at the very beginning of the very end of the 13th, beginning of the 14th century. His name was Moses de Leon, or de Leon, just so you can see it in your head, D-L-E-O-N, the Lion. And Moses de Leon, he wrote it under, Simeon ben Yochai was the guy he wrote as. This guy had been back in the 2nd century of the Common Era, and so he humbly put this other guy's name on it. Humbly, didn't put his name, but of course you're claiming somebody's authority that you wouldn't have, so it works both ways. And today you got some fundamentalist, Jewish, Kabbalistic teachers that just swallow the literalism hook, line, and sinker and don't get the joke, but in fact all of us sophisticated intellectual critics, us critics, understand, as Gershom Scholem proved, that it was actually Moses de Leon in the late 1200s, early 1300s. He died in died in 1305, yeah. And then we got to jump a couple of more centuries to Isaac Luria, L-U-R-I-A. Now, I'm not going to go into what every layer where every layer of it came from here. Let's kind of jump ahead to Isaac Luria, who lived in Galilee in the 16th century, that is the 1500s. He held in common with just about all Kabbalistic Jews that, the doctrine of panentheism, as we call it, that's a Greek term that moderns have constructed. We've seen it earlier in our survey of world religions. Ramanuja apparently was a panentheist. It means that all is made of God, all is part of God, the world is the body of God, God is the soul of the world, and that duality implies that, unlike in straight pantheism, there is a personal God left over God is not simply identical with the essence of everything, as Spinoza figured. Spinoza said there is no personal God. That's really just kind of a mythic superstition. Everything, however, is a manifestation of the uncharacterizable God. Well, panentheism says, well, no, there is a divine personhood over against its, quote, creation, unquote, but the world, including you and me, are the body of this divine person. So are we separate from God? Well, no, we are kind of distinct from God, but we're part of God. So, yeah, there's a God to worship, and yet we are divine. Though that's not evident, right? And the point is to kind of make the connection clear. Okay, so the cosmos is made out of the very being of God. How'd that happen? Well, the day came when God, being infinite and filling the universe, decided that he wanted there to be something else beside him. Well, how can that be, pray tell, if God is infinite? Where else could you put something? I sometimes think I got so many darn books in the house, can't buy any more because there's no room for them. Well, like where Aquinas said this: if you got an infinite God, you can only have one of them, because where would you have any room for the second one? You know, the two-God garage is absurd, right? What can limit the infinite by being beside it? Nothing. You just got one. So, how they conceived this, I don't know, but the imagery was that God contracted into himself. So you got the beginning, you got the universe-filling, infinite, the all in all, and God in that state they call the Ein Sof, EIN-SOF. Or En Sof, E-N-S-O-F. I've seen it both ways, transliterated from the Hebrew. But there is then the great contraction, the Tzimtzum, T-S-I-M-T-S-U-M, the Tzimtzum, the contraction. God contracts into himself to leaving an ontological zone of emptiness in which he will create the world. A void or a womb. Oh boy, are we getting close to the Tantra here. Because there is the garba element, the womb element in which the world is going to come into existence. But wait a minute, it's just nothing, isn't it? God is simply withdrawn to leave a cavity. Well, yes and no, but if you're infinite, in a sense, there's nothing you can do about it. So even though God did somehow contract his essence into himself to leave a space, the space is still him. It's another form of God, but it's a vacuum. It's darkness. It's emptiness. If only you knew the power of the dark side. Yes, there is a shadow side of God from which the world, or I should say, into which the world will be emanated. And that shadow side explains where the evil comes from. Over an hour ago, I said the Zoroastrians had the idea that Ahriman had created the bad stuff. This is sort of within shouting distance of that. It came from the dark side of the Force, and therefore that's where you got death and evil. And didn't the Old Testament say, is there adversity and evil in the city, and it is not from me? God says to Amos. Before the prophets rationalized the idea of the sheer numinous otherness of God and made God good and not evil, you had this all-encompassing Ein Sof. And this is harking back to what happens when you polarize God morally. And so from the dark cavity, the emptiness, the void within the Godhead, comes the fallen world that is subject to sin. I don't know if this helps. It's just a metaphor, but if you know anything... Oh boy, I almost hate to bring this up. I mean, poor physics just gets abused about as badly as the Bible does in religion today. from what I remember, at least from Star Trek, there's matter and there's antimatter, right? And they're opposite charged particles. So instead of electrons, which in our universe have a negative charge, over there in the antimatter universe, they got positively charged counterparts that are called positrons, and so on. Where do you ever see a positron? Well, they see them on these screens that show subatomic entities or bug droppings. I don't know which is which, but they somehow claim to be able to discern these things. And just for a teeny fraction of a second, I guess they have Barry Allen in the lab to follow it with his super fast senses. Just for a split instant, you can see in the decay of antimatter, it leaves a hole in what? In the ether? That's not supposed to exist. But it's a charged hole, and that is a positron. I hope I'm not seeming to mock physics. I really am saying I am too dumb to get it, but these are the few details I recall. And so this weird notion of a charged negativity to which we can give a name, namely a positron, that's the Tzimtzum. God contracts into himself, leaving a vacuum, a void that is nonetheless somehow him, and from which the world with all its shadows appears. It's amazing stuff. It is fascinating stuff. Well, that's only the beginning. That's not really a world yet. So what does God do? Well, God emanates from himself a giant duplicate of himself. This sounds so much like Philo back in the 1st century CE. This giant duplicate of himself is pictured a couple of ways. I mean, it can't actually have looked like anything because God doesn't look like anything. But it can be depicted as either a giant human being filling the universe, and as such he is known as the heavenly Adam, or Adam Kadmon, Kadmon, the heavenly Adam. When, oh man, this is an ancient mythic idea all over the place, right? Gaiamard, Purusha, etc., etc., the primal man of light in Gnosticism, same thing. And then you could also refer to him and describe him as the tree of the Sephiroth, or the Sephirotic tree, which is just a diagram, really, showing the 10 spheres, each of which is constituted by a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which stands for one of the semi-autonomous attributes of God. So it's sort of a diagram of God's nature, not dissimilar to the 7 archangels of Ahura Mazda over in Zoroastrianism. Their attributes, they're sort of, kind of autonomous, but they're not other than God either. And of course this is Trinitarian ambiguity, right? Not the same exactly, but not different either. Your guess is as good as mine. Okay, so we got the Sephirotic tree, the attributes of God, and keep in mind especially that business that the 10 Sephiroth are identical with 10 consonants of the Torah, because the Sephirotic tree / heavenly Adam is a kind of blueprint of the creation that is about to come into being, just as Ahura Mazda had created a heavenly pattern right off the bat. Just as God's Logos externalizes itself in Philo as the plan of creation, and because Adam is the image of God, so is the whole world. And so, but as long as you concentrate on the Sephirotic tree, the letter tree, literally, Sephiroth means the letters. Scribes, Sopharim, the guys that deal with letters. Then if you say that God created on the basis of the Sephirotic tree, you're saying God created by the Word. Why does anybody bother with that? I mean, are they trying to sound like the Gospel of John? That's a Christian document. No, but John and the Kabbalah are both taken off on Genesis, where God creates by fiat. Let there be light. Elsewhere the rabbis and later the Quran will say, God saith unto a thing, be, and it is. Yeah, so he speaks it. And I guess the distinctive thing about the Kabbalah is this letter aspect, this word aspect, means that the world is text. Think of Pythagoras here, who said that the world is made of numbers, everything about it, quantity, dimensionality, mass, form, everything is to be discussed and pictured in terms of numbers. Well, here it's letters. Everything is made of letters and words. The textuality of the world is the result of this. Oh, what a fascinating thing. And ain't it the truth, as a lot of the postmodernists, much influenced by Kabbalah, tell us. All right, so let's, however, switch over to the very useful other side of the coin here, the Adam Kadmon, the heavenly Adam image of the divine image that is the pattern for creation, because now we tie it in with Adam in the book of Genesis, who is a distant copy of this one. He's going to have a big job here in a second. God has also prepared another image. I mean, the world is his image too, in a sense. He has prepared a series of shells to hold the divine light he is about to emit. So it's like goblets and bottles to hold fine wine. These shells are called kelipot, K-E-L-I-P-O-T-H. There's other transliterations, but that's good enough. Kelipot. And they're light, and they will hold a superior, brighter light once it is emitted from the Adam Kadmon, and it is. Suddenly, from his gigantic form, from his nose, his mouth, his ears, his eyes, the light streams forth and reaches the Kelipot to create a world of light held by light. That's what the creation would have been like, a world of pure light. But there's been a little design flaw. Now this seems to cast some doubt on God's foresight. Why did he allow for this? I'm sure there are speculations. I don't know enough about it to know what they say. But the point is really to highlight the absolute power and purity of the light that is to be held in them. And so great and powerful is that divine light that it shatters the light that was intended to contain it. And so the world, the light world, the container of it, explodes and shatters. What happens to the light that did it? Well, it collapses into a shower of sparks, and the kelipot, the shells, now rest on the bottom of the world. I mean, obviously that is an image of some kind. They didn't know about outer space the way we do. I don't know how they pictured it exactly. A nether world, though. The shattered shards of what was once glorious light has become dim and murky matter. And what happens to the light of God emitted from the orifices of the heavenly Adam? It's lost. The photons, I like to use that word, light particles, they didn't have it, but what the heck, that's what they're talking about. The divine photons of the Shekinah glory, the glory cloud of the pillar of fire and all that. The Shekinah photons are lost within the darkness of the wreckage of the world, which has now become matter. So the divine glory must be salvaged, rescued. This is going to an amazing place theologically. So God assigns the heavenly Adam the chore of regathering all the divine sparks, which he does somehow. How long it takes him in this mining operation, you got me. They may have an estimate. I've never read it, or if I did, I don't remember it. But he's just on the point of finishing it, and whammo! Somehow, through his own fault, he trips up or something, the thing goes flying, and all the sparks of light are lost again. Well, this is his fault, and he's punished by being shrunk down. He no longer fills the cosmos, though he's still a giant relative to us. And somewhere along the line, he is encased in a fleshly body. And that kind of explains where we are. This is very much like Origen, the church father. It's very much like Basilides, the Gnostic. Did Isaac Luria and all these other guys, did they know about these Gnostics and Christians? I suppose they could have, but there's no real reason to think so. I kind of go along with Jan Culiano, great student of Gnosticism, who said that, no, it's really structuralism. It's really that the mind, faced by certain problems, again and again through the generations, dealing with the same set of resources and the same mental process, tends to come up with the same ideas again and again. Certainly that's true. And he figured, yeah, that's what's going on here. They just sort of reinvented the wheel when they needed a wheel. And so, well, what happens here? Well, we end up with a mystical account of the origin of the world and the fall of mankind that necessitates not only our salvation by God, sending the Messianic King to redeem his people and to, that is, to buy back their freedom from the nations that oppress them, and to rejuvenate the world and teach the Torah to all nations and the whole thing, a new golden age on earth. And so God's got to save us, but we got to save him. God needs to be saved. I mean, there's more to God. God is everything. God is everywhere. But there is an aspect of God, the great glory of God, the Shekinah, that is lost in the sewer of the destroyed Telepot. And how are they going to be rescued? Well, just as the one Adam, the heavenly Adam, was supposed to do it, he's got to do it again, but it's us. Do you remember seeing the really fascinating movie from the mid-'80s called The Seventh Sign? Not Bergman's The Seventh Seal, which is, of course, incomparably greater. But this is a pretty nifty flick, too. Demi Moore is in it, and Jürgen Prochnow as the Second Coming of Christ. Oh, man, it's fascinating. Well, in it, there's the Second Coming of Christ begins. The seals are breaking and weird things are happening in the world, and Christ comes to explain it. They don't know who he is yet, but he says we're on the verge of the end because the guff, the heavenly storehouse of souls, is empty now. And he says to Demi Moore, who's pregnant, your baby will be the last one with a soul. So what are we going to do here? And, oh, man, it's fascinating. Well, the guff, the storehouse, was the heavenly Adam. All human beings were contained in him. And so what we're doing is another attempt of Adam through us to regather the sparks. Now, it's not just the human race, really. It's specifically Jews, because it's, of course, a Jewish religion. Jews need to practice tikkun, T-I-K-K-U-N, which just means purification. Oh, what is it? What do they do? Well, just prayers and devotion. It's, qualitatively the same sort of stuff all Jews do. And if they do faithfully, this will cause the sparks of the divine Shekinah to become disengaged and to reform. And once this happens, the Messiah will come. Boy, I just love the parallels, because this is not only like Samkhya philosophy in Hinduism, it's not only like Patanjali yoga, it's not only like Jainism and all the Eastern cosmogonies, but it's like Genesis 1 too, that matter has become blasphemously mingled with the spiritual sparks, which must be disengaged if salvation is to come. What a fascinating universal commonality. And why is it? Well, Culiano said it's because we know on introspection that there is some higher aspect of us that needs to be dredged up, and we all have access to the Atman, and we realize they are just windows to the Brahman. I mean, introspection in a mystical way is going to make you think this wherever you are, right, and whatever faith you've been raised in. So, and again, this is very much like traditional rabbinic Judaism, though the explanation is quite different, because the rabbis said, and way back even in New Testament times, there's this idea that if all Israel would just keep a perfect Sabbath, if all Israel would keep the Torah perfectly for one stinking day, that would do it. That would be good enough to enable the Messiah to get the signal and to say, okay, God helps those who help themselves. It's time to go into action. Until that point, they said the Messiah was hanging around the gates of Rome dressed in the rotting shroud of a leper where nobody would expect him. And he's just waiting for the chosen people to get their act together, and when they do, he's ready to go, but he's not going to help them if they're not going to show themselves worthy. Well, you see that, and that's what Peter says in Acts chapter 3. He says, repent therefore, turn from your sins, so that God may send the Messiah chosen for you, Jesus, whom heaven must hold until the regeneration of all things. So if you repent, maybe he'll come. That's fascinating stuff, and it's the same thing here. But the notion that the implication is that God himself must be saved and you're the guy to do it. What a fascinating notion. And no wonder the Kabbalah has always gotten all this interesting attention. And there have been Christians who tried to apply it too, the whole tradition of Christian Kabbalists. Oh man, and that's no big surprise, because Gnosticism was a Christian version of the same thing too. Where, you might ask, did they get all this? I mean, isn't this a little far-fetched from the Bible? Well, read literally, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Moses de Leon, the guy that wrote the Zohar, he worked out a 4-level way of interpreting the Torah, and that's what the Zohar was, ostensibly a vast commentary on the Torah, though it's a little hard for most of us to see what it has to do with it, but you'll see why. He said, you want to know how I approach the scripture? Here's a way to do it. He says, let's use it as an acronym, a pun on Pardesh, or paradise. That word comes through pretty handily. It's a Persian word for pleasure garden, which is what Eden means. Okay, P for Peshat, the simple literal meaning, or as Gershom Scholem puts it in his great essay, the meaning of the Torah in Jewish mysticism. The Peshat designating the literal or simple meaning, which is preserved even in the mystical transfiguration, though it has been made transparent by the mystical light shining through it. You got to read Gershom Scholem's books on all this. Just incredibly fascinating. Okay, so the plain old grammatico-historical senses, we might say. The R, remember this is all consonants being Hebrew, it stands for remez, the allegorical meaning. Are there secrets in the text that aren't that tough to figure out, but that are principles that are given as if they were one-time events? One obvious one we just talked about is when in Genesis 3 it says, he made them coats of skin. Well, the Kabbalah says that's the human fleshly body. the heavenly Adam was a being of light, but he was confined to a body like ours, and that's where we all came from. Does it actually say that? Well, no, not on the surface, but it's not that far down from the surface. Like a snake, you got a talking snake, for Pete's sake. What does that imply? Like Origen, a great allegorist, says no adult thinks a snake spoke to a guy, and so forth. D stands for Daraja, same root as midrash, or madrasa, right? The learning, the place you learn, or what you learn by repetition. This would be the Haggadic or Talmudic meaning, that is, implications of any text for the legal, casuistical interpretation of the law. Here's a bad one. It's a joke, actually, but it's all that comes to mind at the moment. You've heard this one before, but you can't stop me. Two rabbis are debating about the yarmulke. Do you have to wear the skull cap out, and as all Jews did, but one is worried about there being no apparent scriptural justification, and the other one says, what are you talking about? Of course there is. Look at this right here in Genesis 12, so-and-so. Okay, I see the verse. It says, and Abraham went out from there. What does that have to do with the yarmulke? And then the other rabbi says, well, would Abraham go out without his yarmulke? Yeah, well, suppose that were a real argument. It would be Haggadic when trying to read the story for some sort of a hint as to how one ought to keep the Torah and all. Or when Christians argue, hey, Jesus made water into wine, does that mean we can drink wine? Ooh, good question. Yeah, that would be the Darasha. S stands for the sword, S-O-D, the mystical meaning, and that's where we get all this Kabbalistic stuff. Now, what is that? How do you do that? How do you get the mystical meaning? Well, there are three basic techniques that the Kabbalists used. One, the most famous word, is gematria. This is the let me give you a good quote from Sholem, his third lecture in Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism. Because gematria is the calculation of the numerical value of Hebrew words and the search for connections with other words or phrases of equal value. You know, like calculating the number of the beast. How did they do that? Well, in Hebrew, they have the same set of figures for numbers or letters. Let the context tell you which is meant, just like Roman numerals, right? Well, they said, let's take, in a literary context, the letters of a word, convert them to what the sum would be if they were intended as numbers. We'll take the number value and then add them all up. And then if we can come up with another word whose letters would have the same number value, we can substitute that in the sentence, and that'll be a hidden meaning of the text. Here's something from, I forget the guy's name, but Blau in his book about the Christian Kabbalah. It involved the use of the fact that in ancient languages, including Hebrew, the letters of the alphabet also represented numbers. This suggested that when the sum of the numerical equivalents of the letters of two or more words was the same, the words might be considered identical and used interchangeably. Well, here's the second one, notaricon. This is, Sholem says, this is the interpretation of the letters of a word as abbreviations of whole sentences. In other words, you would take a word, if you could figure out how to do this, and it didn't work all the time, but if you picked out a word from the Torah text and said, you know, I could break that word up and take every letter of it and come up with a word that would start with that letter, and if I can make a whole sentence that way, then that sentence will represent a secret meaning of the Torah that is encoded there. Okay. How about Temura? Sholem says, this is the interchange of letters according to certain systematic rules. Blau adds, Temura, which means transposition, is actually a combination of the letter substitutions of the code. So we had that in gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2. and the anagrammatic interchange of the resultant letters. In other words, you could read the word backwards if it made any sense that way. Since an alphabet of 22 consonants provides 21 codes, and since vowel sounds are not printed in Hebrew, an almost infinite number of letter combinations can be produced from any one Hebrew word, and some few of these combinations are likely to form words. This method then is likely to be fruitful. So you could use these techniques, gematria, notaricon, and Tamura, which somehow sounds like an Irish song to me, to mine all kinds of unsuspected words from Scripture. Need I add, the Bible code is something very much like this. It takes great cleverness, but of course, as a historical critic, I can't buy it, right? I mean, if you're talking about what the text meant, it wasn't this. This is a way of making the text speak again in an almost kind of tea leaf reading manner. Now, so theology and mysticism grow, and one has to assume that people don't just do this randomly, that they must have some idea in mind for which they're searching for justification. Like everything I just outlined with Isaac Luria and so on, it's obvious that's a system of thought. It didn't come up like a Mad Libs reading from some guy fooling around with letters and the words. But when someone said, "Where did you get this?" they may have come up with proof texts that way. At least that's what I have to think. So this was all a way to get the Messiah to come. Did he? Well, depends on who you ask, but I would say you bet he did. About a century later, a man named Sabbatai Sevi came along, and he was a Kabbalistic student. He loved the works of Luria. I don't believe he ever met him. And he was born on, so they said, on the 9th of Av in 1626. The 9th of Av, didn't we mention that? Yeah, that's the holiday which commemorated the destruction of the temple. And what do you know? Jewish lore said that the Messiah would be born on that day, and when was Sabbatai Sevi born? Woo! On that day. At least they say so. I don't know how you're going to determine that, but people seem to think so. Then he died 50 years later, 1676, and some say he died on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and you know what that would mean, right? That his death was an atonement. Who is this guy and what happened to him? Well, Gershom Scholem, who wrote this massive, endlessly fascinating page-turner of a biography on him, Sabbatai Sevi, the Mystical Messiah, back some 35 years ago now. He says the evidence makes it pretty clear that Sabbatai Sevi was a manic depressive or bipolar sufferer, as we would call him. He had alternating moods of depression and manic enthusiasm, and somebody like that could just be a helpless nut, or they could be quite an achiever who could go places, as he did. In his visions, I mean, he was a zealous Jew and an ascetic, and fasted and studied the Kabbalah and all that. He was no slouch. He began to have visions in which he thought, geez, maybe I am God's Messiah. And they think, nah, what am I kidding? That's crazy. But in the moods of elation, it would seem quite clear, yeah, I'm the guy. But in the moods of depression, what are you, a blasphemer? Think of Jesus in the Last Temptation of Christ. He's depicted the same way. He hears voices as they say to me, "You God," and worse than that, "You're the Son of God." And then in his times of depression, he thinks, "Oh no, that's Satan talking to me." Very similar to this. And so he decides he's going to go to a prophet to find out, and luckily there happens to be one. In Egypt, there's a holy man from Gaza, not far away, right? The same Gaza we hear about today in Palestine. Nathan of Gaza, he is predicting that the Messiah is about to appear. And very much like a John the Baptist character. And so the mystic Sabbatai Tzvi goes to see him, to inquire. Says, this guy knows the hearts of men, he'll know. And Nathan takes one look at him and says, hey, you're the one I'm talking about, you're the Messiah. Well, that's enough to convince Sabbatai Tzvi, even in a depressed state. And Nathan begins to be his front man, to say, God's chosen is here. It's Sabbatai Tzvi. Now, people, you got to get used to this fact. You're going to have to believe in God's anointed without benefit of miracles. I'm not going to do that, just like Muhammad says in the Quran. The skeptics ask for miracles, but they just show how ignorant they are that way. That's interesting, because people began shortly to circulate all manner of miracle stories that Sabbatai Tzvi had supposedly done, but apparently didn't. You can actually see the stories growing in the telling from letters that people would write and claim to have seen them, but seen what? You compare the accounts and they're different. Well, he was a wandering teacher, didn't teach much beyond Luria except his own messianic role, and he did get a lot of followers very quickly, and in fact had a huge messianic movement all over the Mediterranean world. And he did weird stuff, prophetic blasphemy, you might call it. He would publicly eat non-kosher food and so forth. And why? Well, because he was sort of divine and had gone beyond good and evil. Jim Jones and many prophetic figures are like that. It confirms, not debunks, their divine status, that they can contravene what is binding on you, because they're like close to God and you're not. The ordinary rules don't apply to them. And so you see that, you might think, oh, well, look, what a hypocrite. By their fruit you shall know them. But they say, no, O ye of little faith. Kind of like when Judas is incensed that Jesus is willing to have the anointing with that expensive spikenard perfume. And hey, aren't we in the practice here, as good Democrats, of cashing in such goodies and distributing the money to the poor? What are you letting her lavish this on you? And Jesus says, she's trying to do me a good thing. So why don't you let her alone? You can help the poor anytime you want. There's always plenty of them to help. What's the issue here? You're not always going to have me. Holy mackerel, what a jerk, you might think. But he's throwing down the gauntlet. Who do you think I am? You think I don't deserve this? You better think again. Interesting. And he's not being an egotist necessarily. If God is sending, well, it's kind of like Elisha and the bears. It's not just a personal affront when these kids are mocking him and he has to send the grizzlies to rip them up. They can't be allowed to badmouth the prophet of God that way. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying there's a certain logic about it. So he performed these events that nobody else would have pretended to be able to do, and he certainly had what we would call delusions of grandeur. He began sending epistles to his followers and would sign them, "Your Lord and God, Sabbatai Tzvi." Well, I'd love to have one of those autographs. And what happened? Well, he had no significant teaching, as I say. It was pure charisma, and people were selling everything they owned to go into Palestine, which was controlled by the Ottoman Turks at the time. And Sabbatai Tzvi said, well, I'm going to Jerusalem, where I'm going to face down the Turkish Sultan, and I'm going to convert him to Judaism. And boy, is that going to be a sign of the end. Okay, we'll be there. And so he does go there, and as soon as they spot him, they jail him. Well, that's all right. That's part of the whole thing. The saints, the righteous, get persecuted. It's the darkness before the dawn. He's going to get his audience before the Sultan, and the day comes. Until he does, he's holding court in there and receiving ambassadors and sending out epistles and stuff. But the day finally comes, and oh man, all of his followers saying, this is it. This is when Messiah is going to be made manifest. This is the kingdom of God. God. Well, he goes before the Sultan, who says, now I hear a rumor about there being a conversion here today, and in fact it's true there is going to be one. Of course I'm paraphrasing, but it's not going to be me. I tell you what, Mr. Svi, you got two options. You can either convert to Islam right now, or have your head chopped off. Which is it going to be? Well, no John McCain. This fellow, his reaction was pretty much, Allahu Akbar. He did don the turban, as they say, and became a Muslim on the spot. Uh-oh. Now, you thought having a crucified Messiah was Excedrin headache number one. But I suggest to you that's nothing. That is small potatoes compared to an apostate Messiah. A Messiah who says, yeah, I guess Judaism is a false religion. I've been barking up the wrong tree. Let's join Islam. So how did his disciples react? This is of great interest, not only in itself, but if you're a comparative messianics fan, if we can coin the term. If you can learn anything from what's liable to have happened in early Christianity by seeing what happens in analogous circumstances with similar movements elsewhere. And here we go. Many of the disciples of Sabbatai Tzvi hearing this, well, of course, many of them said, oh my God, I backed the wrong horse. Goodbye. Like the guys going back to Emmaus, right? We thought he was the one to redeem Israel, but back to the drawing board. Not everybody did, though. I would guess most did, but there remained a hardcore of Sabbatians. And among them, some said, well, yeah, all right, he did commit about the worst sin you could commit, renouncing the Jewish faith, but you know why he did that? He committed apostasy for us in our place so that we wouldn't have to do it. So really, by this terrible act, he was saving us. Others said he was defeating sin on a metaphysical level, like the old Manichaean myth of the man of light being devoured by the dragon and then ripping his way out of it to kill the dragon and triumph. Sabbatai Tzvi, to defeat sin, had to plunge down to the depths of sin and then work his way back out, which he will do. So he's in the midst of a kind of descent into hell. I mean, he continued to live in seclusion as a pious Muslim and some connection with his followers. But most people didn't really know what he was doing or thinking. And they said, well, he's engaged in this kind of moral descent into hell. And others said, well, you see, what he was doing was just an evangelistic tactic. It's like when Paul, so they didn't use this comparison, but, you know, in Corinthians, Paul says, I've become all things to all men. To the Jews, I'm like a Jew. To the Greeks, I'm like a Greek. I'll do anything so that by any means I may save some. Well, they thought, yeah, Sabbatai Tzvi had to become a Gentile, a Turk, in order to win them over. But he hasn't really renounced Judaism. Others said, others were docetic about it. You know how some early Christians, a lot of them, said that wasn't Jesus on that cross, it was somebody else, or it was just a hologram. Jesus had already gone up to heaven. Muslims believe that today. Well, sure enough, there were some that said, no, Sabbatai did not renounce the faith and embrace Islam. He went up to heaven and left an image in his place. So yes, people seemed to see it, but it didn't happen. Couldn't happen, so it didn't happen. And one day he will come back. So you had all of these people satisfying themselves with theories about the horrible event, the apostasy. And either denying it happened or rationalizing it. It had to happen for him to complete the messianic work. Anybody hear a familiar note in all this? I mean, isn't it obvious to you that the various atonement theories and docetic theories and so forth in the early church are similar desperate attempts to rationalize the failure of the movement? I refer you to the great book When Prophecy Fails by Schechter, Festinger, and their buddies, which deals with this and other terrible disappointments in religion. Just tack one last appendix onto this. Not only did this movement not collapse, kept on percolating and evolving and mutating while the founder was in seclusion, but eventually, of course, he did die at a pretty young age, younger than me now. I was 50 when he died, and under unspectacular circumstances. And there were people that claimed that he didn't die. Went up to heaven. There were others that claimed that he had died and was entombed, and when they went to the tomb, it was guarded by a dragon, and so forth and so on. So again, something like divine apotheosis narratives. But that wasn't the end either. Among his disciples, there was an interesting character, just as radical but more insidious, indeed fiendish, than Sabbatai Tzvi, a man named Jacob Frank. And this guy believed, just to make a long story short, that he eventually came up with an even more radical theology in which there was a trinity of the Godhead, though he doesn't seem to have borrowed this from Christianity. Who knows if he was influenced? It was certainly around. But his idea was that there was a threefold God: the first cause, a kind of an Aristotelian prime mover, an impersonal deity. Then there was the God of Israel, the king and father of the Old Testament. And then there was a third called the Virgin, which is pretty much like Lady Wisdom, and in the wisdom literature, and obviously analogous to the Virgin Mary. He said that each of these persons of the Godhead would be incarnated on earth, so he believed in divine incarnation too. He said that Sabbatai Tzvi had been the first cause. Now he himself, Jacob Frank, was the God of Israel in human form, and the Virgin was yet to be revealed. Now, what was his task as the new Messiah? Well, this has to do with realized eschatology, and again, it is potentially very fruitful for understanding the New Testament. He and his disciples and many other latter-day Sabbatai Tzvi fans believed that since the Messiah had appeared in the form of Sabbatai Tzvi, the kingdom of God had come. But since Sabbatai Tzvi went into this sort of temporary seclusion or occultation, that the kingdom of God had come invisibly. If you think in terms of the New Testament, it was present but as a mustard seed. It was really there, but it takes the eye of faith to see it now. One day before long it will burst onto the scene so that every eye shall see it, and there can be no doubt, and all the pagans will come to Jerusalem to learn the Torah, right? Everybody will then see with the physical eye what believers now see with the eye of faith. The kingdom of God has come. We will walk no more by faith but by sight. All right, we're in a transitional period. So what do we do? In other words, what difference does it make that the kingdom of God has come? Well, one of the big differences it would make at some point is the Torah would change. There were all sorts of mystics that had thought about this for a long time. Some said that the old one would be replaced by a new one. I like this better, though. Some said that a hitherto invisible Hebrew letter in the text would become visible, changing the reading of the whole text. You can well imagine that might be the case. Any way you cut it, the age of sin would be over, so there would be no need for prohibitions. There would only be permissions and commandments. Everything would be affirmative and positive, and this would even mean that the things once prohibited would now be permitted or even commanded. Now, one day that would be wide open in public. Not now, not yet. But since the kingdom of God had come, we believers ought to live it out as if it were here, which it is, but in secret, which it is. Not for the eyes of outsiders who don't understand, Jacob Frank would have liturgical orgies in the dark in the basement, and all kinds of awful stuff went on because they said, yes, what was once evil is good. What was once prohibited is now commanded, and that's what we're doing. Don't want others to know. One day they'll know, but at the moment, it's secret. And what about our identification as Jews? Well, let's follow in the footsteps of the prophet. And so Jacob Frank and some others said, we too must renounce Judaism, or at least renounce our allegiance to the Messiah. So many of them pretended to be Orthodox Jews, secretly cherishing their allegiance to one or both Messiahs. Some decided to become Muslims outwardly. Some became Roman Catholics. I believe Jacob Frank became a Catholic outwardly, though inwardly they believed in all this, and they cherished the dialectical tension of this. They're notorious, I won't go into yet more, but a fascinating case of an eschatological reversal. You have heard it was said, but I say to you, does this sect survive after all this wasn't all that long ago? I think it probably does. For a long time it was hard to pick up any actual references to a admittedly secret sect, but there are glimmers here and there that imply that the Sabbatian or Frankist movement still exists here and there. And of course there are messianic movements since then, such as that of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. I will talk about that a bit when we get into the historical Jesus and Christianity, which will be next time.